All right, so today we're going to deep dive into a topic that I think a lot of people might think is kind of basic,
Oh, yeah.
but it's the Spanish alphabet.
Yeah, seems simple.
But it is absolutely foundational. You've shared a Deep Dive Spanish with Javi Correa, episode 4. It's about alphabet, and
Excellent resource.
it is. And, when you're first starting out learning Spanish or any language, the alphabet is a huge thing. And we're going to try to pull out all the most useful stuff from this episode for you guys today.
All right, let's dive into the world of Spanish. We're going to unlock some secrets of the Spanish alphabet in this deep dive, using insights from Deep Dive Spanish with Javi Correa. And we're going to learn some really fascinating details, some tips to make learning Spanish a little more fun.
It really is amazing how something as simple as an alphabet can hold so much cultural significance.
Yeah. Javi Correa kicks things off with a really fascinating tidbit. He says that all 27 letters in the Spanish alphabet are considered feminine. You would say la a. I thought that was interesting. What's the story behind that?
That's a great question. It actually reflects the historical influence of Latin, where nouns often had grammatical genders, and Spanish inherited this system, and over time it just became standard to treat letters as feminine nouns.
So it's like each letter has its own personality.
Exactly.
A feminine essence that's woven into the fabric of the language.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool. Does this grammatical gender assignment impact how Spanish speakers perceive language in any way?
It's hard to say definitively, but some linguists believe that grammatical gender can subtly influence how people think about and categorize concepts. But beyond that, it definitely adds a layer of richness and poetry to the language.
I can see that. It's like each word carries a little bit of extra meaning, a connection to the history and culture of the language itself.
Oh, exactly.
Speaking of history, do you remember that mnemonic that Javi gave us to remember which consonants can be doubled? Thinking of the name Carolina.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, that's a good one. It's interesting that only those specific consonants, C, R, L, and N, get to pair up. Is there a linguistic reason for that? Or is it just a quirk of the language?
It's actually related to how sounds evolved in Spanish over time. Those double consonants, they create a slightly different, more emphasized sound that adds nuance to pronunciation.
Interesting. So it's all about creating those subtle variations in sound
Yeah.
that give Spanish its unique rhythm and flow.
Precisely. And that attention to sound is especially important when it comes to vowels. Javi really emphasizes pronouncing each Spanish vowel with a single, clear sound.
Right, and he talked about how this differs from English, where we often have those sounds where two vowels combine, like in the word coin. What do you call those again?
Those are called diphthongs. In Spanish, each vowel has its own distinct sound, and they don't blend together the way they sometimes do in English.
Interesting. So it's about keeping those vowels pure and simple, which contributes to the clarity and musicality of the Spanish language.
Absolutely. And that's why mastering those individual vowel sounds is so crucial for understanding and being understood.
So like, for example, Javi mentions that the Spanish A sounds similar to the A in father, but shorter. And the E is like the E in let.
Yes, and I is pronounced like the I in machine. You really want to focus on isolating those pure vowel sounds.
And then we have the O, which is like the O in more, but without that diphthong sound.
Exactly. And finally, there's U, pronounced like the oo in pool. But again, shorter, avoiding that U sound we sometimes hear in English.
So it's like you're training your ear to hear those subtle differences and then training your tongue to reproduce them accurately.
Exactly. It's a process of recalibrating your perception of sounds and retraining your vocal muscles.
All right, so we've covered the vowels, those building blocks of Spanish sound. Now let's move on to the consonants, where things start to get really interesting, especially with those unique Spanish sounds.
Yeah, I agree. There are some real gems in there that set Spanish apart from other languages.
Absolutely. Javi mentioned a few consonants that often trip up English speakers. H is silent, plain and simple.
So, hotel?
Hotel, aurora now. Aurora.
Yes, super simple.
Straightforward.
Okay, J.
J is always pronounced like a stronger, more guttural version of the English H.
Okay.
So think of it originating further back in your throat.
Yeah.
Some people compare it to the Scottish CH in loch.
Yeah, you are totally right. It sounds like in the word Loch Ness, no? So this sound, it will be represented by the letter J, la letra jota. Por ejemplo, en jamón, ham, in the verb jugar, to play.
That's right. It's a sound that doesn't exist in English, so it can be a little tricky at first. But don't be afraid to exaggerate it while you're practicing. It helps to get a feel for how it's produced in the back of your throat.
And let's not forget about the ella.
An L and a double L.
So L is pretty much as you'd expect,
Okay.
just like the English L.
Yeah.
But when you double it to LL, it transforms into a Y sound,
Ah.
like in llama, flame.
Yes. Okay, so it goes from an L sound to a Y sound.
Exactly.
Got it. And then the letter that is probably the most associated with Spanish
Like in niño, child, or mañana, tomorrow.
is such a great sound.
It is. It's a beautiful sound.
The ñ is definitely a hallmark of the Spanish language.
Yeah, it's so representative of Spanish.
It's more than just a letter. It's a cultural marker.
It's so true. It's instantly recognizable.
Exactly. And as you mentioned, it's not exclusive to Spain.
Right. It's also found in other languages.
Those with a history connected to Spanish influence.
So that includes the Philippines, as you pointed out.
It really highlights the global reach of the Spanish language.
That beautifully unique letter that gives us words like año, which means year. It's a sound similar to the ini in canyon.
Truly a symbol of Spanish linguistic identity. It's a reminder that even though Spanish shares roots with other Romance languages, it has its own unique features that set it apart.
I love how a single letter can hold so much cultural significance. It's like a little flag waving for the Spanish language.
Exactly. And it's not just the individual letters that are interesting. Javi also pointed out some tricky consonant pairs like B and V, which sound the same in Spanish, both pronounced like the B in boy.
Right. I can see how that could be confusing for English speakers who are used to distinguishing between those two sounds.
It can be tricky at first, but the key is to remember that the context of the word will usually help you clarify the meaning.
Okay. And then there's the letter C, which, depending on the following vowel, can sound like the K in king or
Yeah.
TH in thin.
Exactly. If C is followed by an A, O, or U, it has a hard K sound. But if it's followed by an E or an I, it takes on that soft TA sound.
So it's like the C has a split personality,
Right.
changing its sound depending on who it's hanging out with, vowel-wise.
Yeah.
It's all about following the rules.
Exactly. It's one of those fascinating quirks that makes Spanish pronunciation so intriguing. But it gets even more intriguing when we consider regional variations, especially with letters like C and Z.
Oh, right. Javi mentioned that even within Spain itself, there are differences in how people pronounce certain letters. Tell me more about that.
Well, for example, in parts of Spain, the C before E and I and the Z are pronounced with that C sound, like in thin. But in Latin America, these letters are typically pronounced like the S in sun.
Wow, so even though we're talking about one alphabet, there's this incredible regional diversity that shapes how Spanish is spoken. It's amazing how a single language can have so many different flavors.
It truly is. And that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the fascinating world of Spanish pronunciation and its connection to culture and history.
This deep dive is already blowing my mind. I can't wait to learn more about the cultural side of the Spanish alphabet.
Hi everyone. Let me clarify a couple of things about the letter G, letra G. La letra G. How do we pronounce this letter? The letter G, we pronounce the letter G in different ways. If it's combined with the vowels A or U, we will pronounce it ga, go, gu. This is like, for example, in words like gato, cat, goma, goma, this is rubber, or for example, gusano, worm. If we combine the letter G, la letra G, with the vowels E and E, so E and I, then in this case we are going to pronounce the letter like the letra jota, like the letter J. The letter J, we are going to pronounce it like okay, so for example, gente, G-E, gente, or for example, gente means people, or for example, girasol, girasol, G-I, girasol, sunflower. So, but still, if the letter is G combined with U combined with E or E, we will read it like GH in ghetto again. So it will have G sound. Like for example, the words guitarra or guerra. Guitarra, guitar, guerra, war. As you can observe, we pronounce it G-U-I, guitarra, but it sounds like GH in ghetto. No? And also guerra, G-U-E, G-U-E, guerra. We don't pronounce the U. However, if there is an exception, if the letter U, it has two dots on the top of the letter U. These two dots, we name them diéresis. Diéresis. So this diéresis is going to provoke that we have to pronounce the letter U when combined with G, U, I or G, U, E. For example, paragüero, paragüero is the place where we put the paraguas. The paraguas is the umbrella. And for example, pingüino, pingüino, penguin, the animal, no? Pingüino, guino, so we pronounce the U. Paragüero, güero, we pronounce the U. And this is because on the top of the U, we have diéresis, these two little dots on the top of the U. All right?
Absolutely fascinating. You're highlighting a really key point about Spanish pronunciation.
Okay, let's unpack this a little bit more for everyone listening.
What you're referring to with those two dots.
Is called a diéresis, or in Spanish diéresis, or sometimes crema.
Exactly. And this little mark is super important.
Because here's where it gets really interesting.
It tells you, hey, that U in gi or gi, don't skip over it.
Right, without the diéresis, as we were just discussing, that U is silent.
It's there to soften the G sound before an I or E.
But when you see those two little dots above the U,
It signals that the U now has its own distinct sound.
so like you mentioned in a word like pingüino,
Now, R,
R,
this is the one that everybody's afraid of.
the Spanish R.
I think
It can be a little tricky.
it's so hard.
So it has two main pronunciations.
Okay.
When it appears at the very beginning of a word, like in rapido, fast, or when it's doubled, RR,
erre, we have a combination of two R's, double R, which sounds very strong, like in perro. But also it sounds strong if it's a single R at the beginning of the word. For example, ratón. Perro is in the middle, but there are two R's. Perro means dog. Ratón means mouse, is at the beginning of the word, but it's just one R. If the single R is in the middle of the word or at the end of a word, like for example in amor or dinero, amor is money, dinero is, sorry, amor is love, dinero is money. Sometimes it can be the opposite. So it will sound like a soft R, dinero, amor.
which is that strong, vibrant sound that we often associate with Spanish. I remember trying to learn that one. It felt like my tongue was doing gymnastics.
The rolled R definitely takes some practice. But once you master it, it adds a whole new dimension to your pronunciation. It's almost like a percussive element in the language, giving it that signature Spanish flair.
Definitely.
You're highlighting how the sound of R changes,
based on whether it's a single or double R.
or even its position within the word.
Exactly, it's all about context.
Like you pointed out, a single R in the middle.
Dinero amor has a much softer sound,
It's almost like a quick tap of the tongue.
while a double R, perro,
Or an R at the beginning like hashatong.
those get the full strong roll treatment.
It's those subtle differences that give Spanish its flavor.
One letter, two totally different sounds.
Just like what we covered with the diesis.
So what does this all mean for people learning Spanish?
It means paying attention to how the letters are written.
For sure, and you have to listen carefully.
The R is a great letter to focus on. And then we have Q, which I always think of as sort of needing its friend U there to go with it.
That's right. Q is always followed by U in Spanish.
Yep.
And the combination QU consistently sounds just like the English K.
Okay.
And the U in this pairing is always silent.
Always.
So queso cheese.
Sounds like queso.
Exactly, queso. And keen, who sounds like quien.
Okay.
So it's a predictable pairing.
Okay, good. That makes it easy.
What else did Javi have to share?
Well, next, Javi introduces this thing called the Spanish aeronautical alphabet. And it's used for clear communication over radio or phone, especially in aviation.
Oh, yeah, I remember him mentioning that. And it's kind of similar to the English version with Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. But with the Spanish aeronautical alphabet, they use words that are much more descriptive.
Exactly. Instead of just letters, they use place names, cities, regions of Spain,
Right.
even food.
Yeah, I remember that. It was like E de España, E for Spain,
Yeah.
and Q de queso,
Yeah.
Q for cheese.
Yeah.
I thought that was brilliant. So instead of those dry technical terms, you get these little glimpses into Spanish culture, as you're spelling things out.
I know, right? It's like each letter is a mini adventure. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals a lot about Spanish pride and the importance of national identity.
Really?
It's as if they're saying, this is who we are, and we're going to infuse even our most technical language with our cultural heritage.
Wow, I never thought of it that way. It's like they're showcasing the richness and diversity of their culture through the alphabet.
Exactly.
Are there any other interesting examples from the Spanish aeronautical alphabet that stand out to you?
Oh, definitely. For the letter B, they use Barcelona, one of the most vibrant and well-known cities in Spain. And for V, they use Valencia, famous for its oranges and paella.
So it's like they're taking you on this mental tour of Spain,
Right.
highlighting its iconic landmarks and culinary delights.
Yeah.
What a fun and memorable way to learn the alphabet.
Exactly.
Makes me want to explore more about the stories behind those letter choices. Like, what inspired them to choose queso for Q, for example? What's the cultural significance of cheese in Spain?
That's a great question. I think it reflects the important role that food plays in Spanish culture. Cheese is a staple in Spanish cuisine, and it often has regional variations, just like the language itself. So choosing queso for Q is a way of celebrating that culinary heritage.
It's like they're saying, hey, we're not just about serious business here.
Yeah.
We also know how to enjoy life, appreciate good food, and have a little fun with our language.
Exactly. It adds a touch of warmth and personality to what could otherwise be a very technical system.
This deep dive is really making me appreciate the beauty and complexity of the Spanish language. I'm starting to see how even something as simple as an alphabet can be a gateway to a whole new world of cultural understanding.
I'm so glad to hear that. It's truly fascinating to explore the connections between language and culture. And speaking of connections, there's another interesting aspect of the Spanish alphabet that Javi touches on.
Oh, okay, I'm all ears. What other interesting aspects did Javi have to share?
Well, he mentions that even though we've talked about this Spanish alphabet, there's not really a single universally agreed upon version of the aeronautical alphabet across the whole Spanish-speaking world.
Oh, wow. So even with something that seems as standardized as the aeronautical alphabet, there's still variation between regions.
Exactly. It's kind of similar to how different Spanish-speaking countries, they might have slightly different words for everyday objects, or they might use certain expressions unique to their region.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a reminder that language is always kind of evolving and adapting,
Yeah.
even within specific contexts like aviation. So what kind of differences might we hear?
Well, for instance, in some Latin American countries, they might use local geographical features or historical figures for certain letters. So instead of hearing I de España, you might hear I de Ecuador or I de Esmeralda for a mountain range.
So it's like each region gets to personalize the alphabet a little bit and weave in elements of their own local identity.
Exactly. It highlights the beautiful tapestry of cultures and dialects that make up the Spanish-speaking world.
I'm really starting to grasp the profound connection between language and culture. It's not just about communicating information. It's about expressing, who you are, where you come from, what you value.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Learning a language is about so much more than just memorizing vocabulary and grammar rules. It's really about stepping into a different worldview and embracing the rich tapestry of human expression.
Well, after this deep dive, I'm definitely inspired to continue my Spanish language journey. I'm eager to explore all the regional variations, the different accents, and the cultural stories that are embedded in each word and phrase.
And remember, practice makes perfect. The more you immerse yourself in the sounds of Spanish, the more natural and effortless your pronunciation will become.
Yeah, great advice. I can see myself someday, confidently ordering queso manchego at a tapas bar in Madrid, rolling my R's with flair.
I have no doubt you'll get there. And as you continue exploring the Spanish language, here's a thought-provoking question for you to ponder. What can the diversity of Spanish alphabets teach us about the importance of embracing those regional differences and celebrating those unique contributions of various cultures?
That's a great question to keep in mind. It makes me really appreciate the richness and complexity of language and how it reflects the multifaceted nature of human identity.
Absolutely. Keep that curiosity alive. The world of language is full of surprises and insights just waiting to be discovered.
Well said. On that note, we'll say adios for now and happy language learning.